Hello and welcome. India's unemployment rate has shot up at 7.8% in the month of June 2022 with some 13 million jobs lost, mostly in the agriculture sector. Now, that's not what we are really focused on. What we're trying to understand today is what is the matrix of employment and unemployment in this country? How many jobs are there for those who want them, or how many people could be employed amongst those who want to be employed, and then how many are the unemployable? Now, furthermore, there are two kinds of people who could potentially provide jobs. Apart from those who are self-employed, they could be government jobs, they could be private sector jobs. Now, what is that universe looking like today? And then we could talk about what that universe could look like tomorrow. For example, in the case of government, there are many jobs that are there but are not exactly on offer even at this point of time. And at the same time, the government has also announced quite recently several jobs which are really in some ways filling up past vacancies. But let's try and understand all of this with Mahesh Vyas, Managing Director at the Center for Monitoring of the Indian Economy and a well-known economist. Mahesh, thank you very much for joining us. So let me ask you to first build up from the bottom. So let's say we have a population of 1.3 billion. Who are the people and what is the number at this point of people who are in the market for jobs and are actively looking for jobs? And then we'll come to the employability and the employment.
Yeah, so let's put this in perspective. You're very right in getting this matrix right. So we have about 1.3 billion people in India, but what matters from labor markets is actually just 1 billion people. These are the people who are of 15 years of age or more. We don't count those people who are less than 15 years of age in the labor markets. So that's about 1 billion people who are counting. And what happens is that a fairly large proportion of these people choose not to work for profit or for wages. So the number of people who come to the labor market to say that I'd like to find a job or I'd like to work for wages, where you're working for somebody else, or for profit, you're working for yourself, self-employed, that becomes your labor market. Becomes your labor force. That labor force in India has been in the vicinity of around 430 to 450 million. So of 1 billion people who are more than 15 years of age, about 45%, 44% of them are those who are offering themselves to work for wages or for profit. Mind you, those who are working at home, just taking care of themselves or taking care of family people, cooking, washing, taking care of kids or elderly, are not a part of the labor force. That's convention. Only when you go out to say that you're going to work for wages or for profits do you get counted as a part of the labor force. So that's some 44 million, or it is 440 million or 430 million. Now, of these, about 30 million or 40 million don't find jobs. So the country is able to offer jobs only to around 400 million people. That's the number of people who are employed in the country. In the last numbers you mentioned in June, the number had fallen quite substantially to 390 million. So those are the broad numbers. Around 35 million people are unemployed, around 400 million people are employed. That's the labor force, around 430, 440 million. Total people more than 15 years of age or thereabouts is about 1 billion people.
Right. And okay, so let's go one by one now. So you said about 44% are the people who offer themselves a job. So there's another 60% who are dependent on these 44%?
Yes, they are.
By choice, and that percentage or ratio will mostly remain that way right through?
Well, that's the way it remains in India, and the problem is the dependence, the ratio of dependence actually keeps on increasing. Mind you, the number is more than 60%, because all the people who are less than 15 years of age are also dependents,
right,
which are not counted over here.
Right. Okay. So now, if we were to go a step forward, this figure, you said, it sounded like you said this has been there for a while. So are you saying that the number of people who have offered themselves in the job market has been in that 410 to 20 million range for some time now, for some years?
That's right. So this number hasn't grown much. And if you look at it as a proportion, like what is the proportion of people who are 15 years of age and more, who are offering themselves in the labor market, that proportion has been falling. That proportion used to be around 44 to 45%, is now down to 39%. So the proportion matters a lot. How much of the proportion of people more than 15 years of age, or 15 and more, are offering themselves? That's called the labor force participation rate. That participation rate is falling.
Right. And how long has this figure been in this range now? For how many years?
We have been tracking this from 2016. It's been in this range since then.
So despite the fact that we are adding population, that number of people obviously every year are coming into the workforce, or at least into the employable age category, you're saying this number is roughly the same?
Yes.
And what does that indicate?
It indicates that India is not generating sufficient jobs for the number of people who are coming potentially into the labor market.
Right.
And thereby, we are losing what is called as the demographic dividend. India is in this beautiful window where we are offering lots of young men and women who are employable. If these people get employed, India generates a lot more income. These households generate income and savings, which will be useful for them as they grow older. But if we don't provide these jobs to them, they neither get the income, nor do they get the savings for their future.
So you said of the people, 430 million, roughly 30 to 40 million are not employed, as in they are looking actively for jobs but not finding them. Is that the figure?
That's right.
Right. So now, however, you're also saying that since 2016, this aggregate number has remained at 430. So does this mean that just only because people are not offering themselves in the job market, we are seeing this consistent figure? And if they were, then this would have been much higher, the number of unemployed?
That's right. The number of unemployed would have been much higher. Because the reason why this number has remained as stable as it is because people get dejected. They come to the labor markets, they don't find enough jobs, you can't hang around there for too long. You finally say that I'm not looking for a job. And this is particularly happening in the case of women. They feel that getting jobs is so difficult, it's not even worth offering our services in the labor market.
Right. So now, from a policy point of view, what does policy address? Does policy address only these 30-40 million who are known to be clearly in the job market, or does it also try and address those who are, let's say, staying out for the reasons you just mentioned, which includes the desire not to, or the lack of desire to participate in that job market?
Well, the policy should address the issue of the demographic dividend. The policy should address the opportunity which India has, that it is producing a large labor force that needs to be deployed for the benefit of the people of the country. That is the most important thing, because this is a once in a multi-generation lifetime period that you get this window when you get this fat working class people, working age people, and policy should just address that. So policy doesn't have to address only about employment. It also has to address issues regarding quality of jobs, wages. So, I mean, you can get jobs by pushing a cart down the street, hawking some odd items. That's not the kind of jobs we should aspire, and that's not the kind of jobs that policy should be aiming at. Policy should be aiming at ensuring good quality jobs, good wages, stable jobs which generate savings for a better future for the country.
Right. Okay. So now let's look at where those jobs could go. Now, we've talked about self-employed, and we've talked about, or we've touched upon government and private sector. Now, let me focus on government and private sector specifically, because we have seen some announcements from the government on that accord. Now, if we look at many parts of the economy, there is central government, which itself, by the government's own admission, has close to 0.8 million positions that are vacant. In every state government in this country, there are positions that are vacant, including in areas like education, healthcare, and of course law enforcement, that is police. And again, there are lots of statistics to suggest that there could be close to, a couple of million jobs, or maybe several million jobs going in that count too. So now, what is the ability and of the government, let's say, to fill this 20 to 30 million gap, and why has this ability, let's say, remained, at least from a perception point of view, stable or unmoving for many years?
This is, I think, one of the most important questions that the country needs to answer. We are in a situation where the government is unable to provide services that it needs to provide us. For example, we are unable to get adequate services from the government in respect of, say, security or judiciary or many other services. The quality of the water we get in our taps is not of good quality. The quality of education in primary health education centers or health in the health centers is leaves a lot that we desire still from them. So the government is unable to provide the services it ought to provide us. And it is in a situation where it cannot hire people to provide those services because its finances are far too constrained. So we have come into a situation where the government is unable to provide services and is unable to hire the people it can. The problem is the pension liability has grown so much that it can't afford those people. So I think we require a major reform on government and its services to India and the sustainability of those services. To the best of my understanding, the proportion of people employed in government in India is amongst the lowest in the world. Most countries, particularly developed countries, the proportion of people hired in government is much higher. And the government does provide a lot more services to its people. So I think we have a situation where the government is unable to meet its basic requirements towards its citizens. And therefore, it has a large number of vacancies, which it is unwilling to because it is not able to afford filling in those vacancies. It acknowledges that there are vacancies, but it is unable to figure out how it will foot the bill.
Right. So
maybe it can foot the bill in 1 year because it is budgeted, but it cannot foot the bill of the pensions.
Right. So for example, the figure which I missed saying earlier, 1 in 6 of teaching positions in this country are vacant. 1 in 5 police positions in this country are lying vacant. So, and you've also addressed, and may I ask you to sort of maybe dwell on that a little more. This is also a common perception or a misperception that the government in India is overstaffed, whether it's at the central level or at the state level. So what you're saying right now is that it's the opposite.
Yes, the government is not overstaffed. The government is underutilizing the staff it has, and it is underemployed. So it requires to correct on both fronts. You'll have lots of government servants who are lacking in their applications. You have lots of people doing work very inefficiently. So there's a need for us to streamline their work. I don't think they're inefficient people. It's an inefficient system, which requires to be streamlined, and the government requires then to hire more people.
Right. So let me come to, before I go to the private sector, let me come to those two announcements that the government had made recently. So one was the hiring of or the filling of 1 million jobs in the next 18 months, and the other is the army recruitment scheme or the Agniveer. How do you see it from a macro policy jobs perspective?
The announcement from the Prime Minister's office regarding 1 million jobs being provided in the next 1.5 years is nothing short of being dramatic. It can make a huge difference because these are the best quality jobs available today. 1 million good quality jobs in the government is like a dream come true to many people. So if that really happens, and I do not know how they're going to solve the affordability on the pensions front, it will make a very huge difference. I think it will be important for the government to sort this out correctly, to think it through correctly, but at least insofar as the labor markets are concerned, insofar as jobs are concerned, it's going to make a huge difference. Insofar as Agniveer is concerned, I am not in a position to comment on the impact of that on the armed forces. Only people who are in the armed forces or experts on that can comment on that. So I'll refrain from doing that because I don't know. But I can say one thing. that it has dashed hopes of people who are preparing for something else. So, a lot of people in many parts of the country were preparing for a career in the armed forces. And when it came to just the hiring part, when it came to the last moment, the rules were changed and a lot of people felt shortchanged. So I think it's important, a lesson to learn over here is that it's important not to throw such surprises on the downside. So that's the only point. I don't think it's a good thing for people to work so hard towards getting admission into armed forces and then feeling they're not going to get it.
Right, but let's look at it from a numbers point of view, right? Let's go back to that 20 to 30 million people who are unemployed. That of course assumes that those who are already employed don't want these jobs, which is very likely they will. So how do you see, I mean, as a number, what is going into a potential Agniveer, which is the army recruitment, doesn't seem much.
No, it isn't much, but it makes a material difference. It makes a material difference to a very large number of people. See the multiplier effect of that. If you get a job in, let us say, the dairy milkman's shop to deliver milk in the neighborhood, it doesn't make a big difference to your family. But if you get a job in the armed forces, you can make a material difference to your entire family and even beyond that. And that's the potency of that job. So the damage it does when the rules of the game change over there is much more than a different kind of a job. And mind you, the people who are going to join these jobs, less than 18-year-old young men, max up to 21, it was a very different bracket. And they were not the guys who were looking at getting into graduation and getting jobs in an office. They were clearly focused into getting into the armed forces.
Right, and if you were to break up that 420 or 30 million, how much is in the organized sector versus unorganized and government versus non-government?
So, organized is about 20% and the rest is unorganized. I don't have the number for government readily available, but that isn't much. So if organized is 20, obviously government is a small proportion of that. Is a proportion of that, not a small, it's a significant proportion of that.
Right. So if we were to now look at the private sector, what is the role and the likely contribution of private sector given where private sector is today and the manner in which it has been adding jobs or not, particularly in the non-knowledge sector areas?
I think there's a difference in the way we look at the private sector and the government sector. The private sector has got no responsibility towards giving jobs. The private sector requires incentives, or rather needs to have the enabling environment to provide jobs. Government, on the other hand, is responsible for creating the environment that motivates private sector to invest, which can create jobs. So the government has got a little heavier responsibility. It's not only the case that it has to provide its own jobs, but it has also to create the enabling environment to motivate private sector to create more jobs. The private sector is going to only react to a situation if the environment is conducive towards more investments, long-term investments, better quality jobs, they will do it. If they find that the environment is not conducive towards that, maybe it is because of the fear of tax authorities, or it could be because, more importantly, the markets are not good enough. Maybe the external environment is too much uncertainty over there. It's the government's responsibility to ensure that the private sector does find it really profitable to invest, to hire people with good quality jobs.
Right, and another, and perhaps one of the last questions in this, to build on that, so we recently saw TCS saying they've crossed 6 lakh employees. I mean, who could have ever imagined that a private company would be larger than any government organization, single organization. But on the other hand, we are unlikely to, perhaps for productivity and technology reasons, see this kind of job creation elsewhere, or do you feel otherwise?
I don't see a reason why it cannot be replicated in other places. Enterprise just needs to see the advantage of doing this large-scale hiring. If TCS can do it for software, we should learn a lesson. that enterprise is willing to hire so many people under one roof and learn lessons from the same elsewhere. Exploit the opportunity of India having a large contingent of young, employable people. I don't see a reason why we should believe that it's not possible elsewhere.
Right. And last question. So if you look at the figure that, and it went up quite dramatically by more than 10 million, I'm talking about the number of unemployed. What's the prognosis for the coming months, particularly through this monsoon period, Mahesh?
We shouldn't focus too much on the loss of jobs in June. As I have written about that, that's transitory. So people have quit their jobs as daily wage laborers in some parts of the economy and have moved to becoming agricultural laborers in the Kharif sowing season, but the rains got delayed. As a result, they were left unemployed, or they left the labor markets. They know that there's employment coming up over there, but that's delayed by a few weeks. As the rains have started coming in, the labor participation rate in agriculture, or rather in rural India, has started rising. So those 13 lakh people who lost their jobs in the month of June, very likely they will be back in employment as agricultural laborers, mostly in the month of July.
Right. Mahesh, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.